There comes a quiet moment in life when you realize that the pain you are carrying is no longer coming from what people did to you, but from what you are still holding on to. You have outgrown certain conversations, certain connections, and certain versions of yourself, yet your mind keeps dragging you back to places your soul is ready to leave. Buddhism teaches that not all endings require closure, explanations, or noise. Some endings are meant to happen in silence. When you let go quietly, without anger or announcement, you do not lose anything, you reclaim your peace. And the moment you choose to release what is stealing your happiness, life does not end. It begins again. 1. Holding on is often the real source of suffering. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not come only from losing something or someone. Very often, suffering comes from refusing to accept reality as it is right now. When life shows you that a relationship has changed, that a situation no longer supports your well-being, or that someone no longer treats you with care and respect, the pain does not come from that truth alone. The deeper pain comes from resisting it. You keep holding on, hoping things will return to how they once were, even though everything inside you already knows they will not. When you hold on to people who repeatedly disappoint you, you begin to live in a constant state of emotional tension. You replay conversations in your mind. You imagine different outcomes. You tell yourself stories like, "If I explain one more time, they will finally understand," or "If I stay patient a little longer, things will change." The mind creates these hopes as a form of self-protection, but instead of protecting you, they trap you. Each unmet expectation becomes a new wound, and each broken hope deepens the suffering. Buddhism explains that attachment is dangerous not because caring is wrong, but because attachment ties your inner peace to something you cannot control. You cannot control how people behave. You cannot control how situations unfold. You cannot control whether someone chooses growth, honesty, or kindness. Yet when you cling, you act as if your happiness depends on these external things obeying your wishes. This creates anxiety, fear, and constant disappointment. The Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering because it makes your well-being conditional. You tell yourself, "I will be at peace when they change," or "I will be happy when this situation improves." Until then, you wait, endure, and silently hurt. This is why holding on feels exhausting. It drains your emotional energy, keeps your mind restless, and prevents you from fully living in the present moment. Letting go does not mean you never loved, never tried, or never cared deeply. It means you recognize when holding on is costing you your peace. It means you stop sacrificing your emotional health for something that no longer nourishes your spirit. In Buddhism, letting go is not giving up. It is waking up. It is choosing truth over illusion and peace over prolonged suffering. When you release what no longer aligns with your well-being, you are not losing anything valuable. You are simply freeing yourself from pain that no longer needs to be carried. 2. Silence is a form of self-respect. Buddhism teaches that not every truth needs to be spoken, and not every ending needs an explanation. Many people suffer not because they are hurt, but because they feel the need to justify their pain to others. When something breaks inside a relationship or a situation, the instinct of the ego is to explain, defend, argue, or seek validation. You want the other person to understand how much they hurt you. You want acknowledgement, closure, or an apology. But Buddhism reminds us that peace does not come from being understood by others. It comes from understanding yourself. Silence is often misunderstood as weakness, but in reality, silence is a sign of inner strength. When you stop explaining yourself to people who have already shown you who they are, you are practicing self-respect. You are saying, without words, "I no longer need to convince you of my worth." When you argue or repeatedly explain your feelings to someone who does not listen, you are still emotionally tied to their approval. Silence, on the other hand, is freedom. It breaks the cycle of emotional dependency. Buddhism speaks of right speech, which includes knowing when not to speak. Not every truth needs to be delivered. Not every realization needs to be shared. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is to step back quietly and protect your energy. Silence keeps you from reopening wounds that are trying to heal. It prevents unnecessary conflict. It allows your mind to settle instead of constantly replaying conversations and imagined responses. Letting go in silence also teaches you to trust your inner wisdom. You no longer look outside yourself for permission to leave, to change, or to move forward. You do not need dramatic goodbyes or emotional confrontations to prove that something mattered. Walking away quietly does not mean the pain was small. It means your peace is now more important than being heard. In Buddhism, silence is sacred. It is the space where clarity arises. When you choose silence over reaction, you stop feeding situations that drain you. You stop giving your energy to people who cannot meet you with understanding. Over time, this quiet withdrawal restores your balance. Your mind becomes lighter, your heart becomes calmer, and you realize that self-respect is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply chooses peace and moves on. 3. Not everyone is meant to walk with you forever. Buddhism teaches one of the most difficult truths for the human heart to accept. Everything in life is impermanent. People change, feelings change, paths change. Yet much of our suffering comes from pretending that what is temporary should last forever. We meet people during certain phases of our lives, and because they once brought comfort, joy, or meaning, we assume they must remain with us no matter how much we grow or how much the relationship changes. This belief quietly traps us. Not everyone enters your life to stay. Some people come to teach you patience. Some come to show you what love feels like. Others come to show you what self-respect requires. When you try to force permanence onto a connection that has already fulfilled its purpose, pain begins. You may notice that conversations feel heavy, misunderstandings happen more often, or being around certain people leaves you drained instead of uplifted. These are not accidents. They are signs that the relationship no longer aligns with who you are becoming. Buddhism reminds us that growth naturally creates distance. As you become more aware, more peaceful, and more aligned with your inner values, some people will no longer resonate with you. This does not mean anyone is wrong or bad. It simply means your paths are no longer moving in the same direction. Suffering arises when you try to shrink yourself to maintain connections that no longer fit. You silence your needs, tolerate disrespect, or ignore your intuition just to avoid separation. Over time, this creates resentment, sadness, and inner conflict. Letting go in silence means accepting this truth without bitterness. You do not need to blame others, and you do not need to blame yourself. You understand that clinging to people who are no longer meant to walk with you only delays your growth. Buddhism teaches that attachment to people can become attachment to an old version of yourself. When you refuse to let go, you are not only holding on to them, you are holding on to who you used to be. This is why letting go feels so frightening. It is not just the fear of losing someone else, but the fear of stepping into the unknown version of yourself. Yet Buddhism teaches that liberation begins where attachment ends. When you release relationships that no longer serve your well-being, you create space for peace to enter your life. You stop forcing harmony where it no longer exists. You stop chasing connection at the cost of your inner balance. Letting go does not erase memories or deny what once mattered. It honors it. You can be grateful for what a person brought into your life without insisting they remain forever. In silence, you bow to the lesson, not the attachment. You allow life to flow instead of resisting it, and in doing so, you discover a quiet strength within yourself. A strength that understands that walking alone for a while is far healthier than walking with people who prevent you from becoming who you are meant to be. When you accept that not everyone is meant to walk with you forever, your heart softens instead of hardens. You stop chasing, stop forcing, and stop clinging. Peace begins to replace confusion. Clarity replaces emotional struggle, and you realize that letting go is not losing people. It is choosing alignment, growth, and inner freedom over familiarity and fear. 4. Letting go is choosing peace over emotional addiction. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes not from pain itself, but from our attachment to familiar emotional patterns. Many people believe they are holding on because they love, but in reality, they are holding on because they are afraid. Afraid of loneliness, afraid of emptiness, afraid of starting over. Over time, the mind becomes addicted to what is familiar, even when what is familiar is painful. This is why people stay in draining relationships, toxic environments, or unhappy situations far longer than they should. The pain feels known, predictable, and strangely comforting compared to the uncertainty of letting go. Emotional addiction works quietly. You tell yourself that you are being loyal, patient, or understanding, but deep inside, you feel exhausted, anxious, and restless. You check your phone too often. You replay old memories. You analyze every word, every silence, every change in behavior. Your mood rises and falls based on how someone treats you or how a situation unfolds. Buddhism teaches that this is not peace. This is bondage. When your inner state depends on something outside you, you are no longer free. The Buddha taught that attachment is the cause of dukkha, or suffering, because it creates dependence. You begin to believe that without this person, this role, or this situation, you will be incomplete. This belief keeps you trapped. You may know intellectually that something is harming you, yet emotionally, you feel unable to release it. The mind resists letting go because it fears the silence that follows. It fears the space where identity dissolves and the ego no longer has something to cling to. Letting go, from a Buddhist perspective, is not an act of loss. It is an act of courage. It is choosing peace over emotional chaos. It is choosing inner stability over constant emotional highs and lows. When you let go of emotional addiction, you stop needing external validation to feel worthy. You stop depending on others to regulate your emotions. This does not happen instantly. It happens slowly, gently, through awareness and compassion toward yourself. At first, letting go feels uncomfortable. There is a sense of emptiness, like something important is missing. Buddhism teaches that this emptiness is not a void to be feared. It is space. Space where clarity can arise. Space where the mind can rest. Space where true happiness, which does not depend on conditions, can begin to grow. When you no longer feed emotional cravings, your nervous system starts to calm, your thoughts slow down, your heart begins to feel lighter. Choosing peace means accepting that some emotional bonds were never meant to last forever. It means recognizing when attachment has turned into self-harm. You may still feel love, you may still care, but you no longer sacrifice your well-being for emotional familiarity. Buddhism teaches that real love does not bind or consume. Real love allows freedom, including the freedom to walk away when staying causes suffering. Letting go of emotional addiction also means learning to sit with your own feelings without escaping into distraction, obsession, or attachment. You learn to observe loneliness without panic. You learn to experience sadness without clinging to its cause. This is where true inner strength is born. You realize that you are capable of holding yourself through discomfort. You do not need to numb it with unhealthy attachments. Over time, something powerful happens. The grip loosens, the emotional noise fades. You no longer feel pulled toward what once controlled your mood. You begin to experience a steady, quiet peace that does not depend on anyone else's actions. This is what Buddhism calls liberation, not the absence of emotion, but freedom from being ruled by it. Letting go is not about becoming cold or detached from life. It is about becoming deeply connected to yourself. When you choose peace over emotional addiction, you reclaim your energy. You stop leaking yourself into situations that drain you, and in that calm, steady space, you finally experience happiness that is not fragile, not conditional, and not easily taken away. 5. You do not need permission to start over. Buddhism teaches that every moment carries the possibility of renewal, yet many people remain trapped in suffering because they believe they need permission to change their lives. They wait for closure, apologies, explanations, or validation from others before allowing themselves to move forward. This waiting becomes another form of attachment. You tell yourself that once someone admits their mistakes, once circumstances improve, or once you finally feel understood, then you will be free to begin again. But Buddhism reminds us that freedom does not arrive from the outside. It begins the moment you release the belief that someone else must unlock it for you. The mind often clings to the past because it feels unfinished. You replay memories, conversations, and painful moments, hoping to rewrite them in your favor. You imagine different endings where you are appreciated, respected, or chosen. Yet this mental replay only keeps you tied to what has already passed. Buddhism teaches that the past cannot be changed, but your relationship to it can. Starting over does not require erasing memories, it requires loosening their grip on your present. Many people fear starting over because it feels like admitting failure. They think letting go means they wasted time, energy, or love. But Buddhism teaches that nothing is wasted when it contributes to awareness. Every experience, even painful ones, carries a lesson. Starting over is not denying what happened. It is integrating the lesson and choosing not to suffer from it any longer. You honor the past by learning from it, not by living inside it. You do not need permission from people who hurt you. You do not need their understanding or approval. Often, those who benefited from your silence, patience, or sacrifice will resist your growth. They may question your decision, minimize your pain, or accuse you of changing. Buddhism teaches that clinging to others' opinions is another form of suffering. When you seek permission to heal, you give others power over your peace. True liberation begins when you trust your own inner knowing. Starting over is not a dramatic event, it is a quiet internal shift. It happens when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop revisiting the same pain, when you stop hoping for a different version of the same situation. It is the moment you choose clarity over confusion. You may still feel fear, sadness, or uncertainty, but you no longer let these emotions dictate your direction. You move forward gently, one step at a time. Buddhism teaches that identity itself is impermanent. The person you were yesterday is not the person you are today. When you cling to an old version of yourself, you prevent growth. Starting over means allowing yourself to evolve without guilt. You are not betraying who you were. You are honoring who you are becoming. Life is not meant to be lived in one fixed form. It is meant to flow. There is also deep compassion in starting over. Many people punish themselves for past decisions, believing they must carry regret as a form of responsibility. Buddhism teaches that self-punishment is not wisdom. It is ignorance of your own humanity. Starting over is an act of kindness toward yourself. It is saying, "I have suffered enough. I choose peace now. This decision does not make you weak, it makes you aware. When you stop waiting for permission, something powerful shifts inside you. Your energy returns, your mind becomes clearer. You stop feeling stuck between what was and what could have been. You begin to live in what is. Each day becomes lighter because you are no longer carrying unnecessary emotional weight. Starting over does not mean you know exactly where you are going. It means you trust yourself enough to move forward anyway. Buddhism teaches that the path reveals itself as you walk it. When you let go of the past without needing approval, you step into a life guided by awareness rather than fear. And in that quiet beginning, you discover that you were never late, broken, or lost. You were simply ready when you finally chose yourself. 6. Inner peace grows when you stop reacting. Buddhism teaches that most suffering is not created by what happens to us, but by how we react to what happens. Events themselves are often neutral. It is the mind that labels them as good or bad, threatening or unfair, personal or intentional. When you react automatically, without awareness, you hand over control of your inner world to external circumstances and other people's behavior. This is why reacting feels exhausting. Your peace is constantly being pulled in different directions. Many people live in a state of emotional reactivity without realizing it. A message is not replied to, and the mind creates fear. A tone changes, and the heart tightens. Someone disagrees with you, and anger rises. Buddhism teaches that this constant reacting keeps the mind restless and unsettled. Each reaction strengthens old habits of fear, anger, and attachment. Over time, these habits shape your identity and determine how you experience life. The Buddha taught the importance of awareness, the space between stimulus and response. When something happens, there is a brief moment before you react. In that moment lies freedom. If you pause, observe your thoughts, and feel your emotions without acting on them, you break the cycle of suffering. You begin to see that emotions rise and fall on their own, like waves in the ocean. They do not need to be obeyed or expressed immediately. Stopping your reactions does not mean suppressing your feelings. Buddhism does not teach emotional repression. It teaches emotional understanding. When you stop reacting, you allow yourself to feel without being controlled. You notice anger without becoming cruel. You notice sadness without collapsing into it. You notice fear without letting it dictate your choices. This gentle observation slowly weakens the power emotions have over you. Letting go in silence becomes easier when you stop reacting. Many conflicts continue only because both sides keep feeding them with words, explanations, and emotional responses. When you withdraw your reaction, the situation loses its energy. Silence becomes your shield, not because you are avoiding reality, but because you refuse to let unnecessary emotions disturb your inner balance. Buddhism teaches that reacting often comes from the ego's need to protect its image. You react to defend yourself, to be right, to be seen, or to be valued. When you let go of this need, peace naturally follows. You realize that not every opinion matters, not every misunderstanding needs correction, not every provocation deserves attention. Inner peace grows when you choose awareness over impulse. At first, stopping your reactions feels uncomfortable. The ego feels ignored. The mind feels restless. You may feel an urge to explain, to justify, or to retaliate. Buddhism teaches that this discomfort is temporary. If you remain present and compassionate with yourself, the urge passes. Each time you do not react, you strengthen your ability to remain calm. Over time, calm becomes your natural state rather than a forced effort. As reactivity fades, your inner world becomes quieter. You stop being emotionally pulled by other people's moods. You stop interpreting everything as a personal attack. You begin to see life more clearly, without the fog of constant emotional judgment. This clarity allows wiser decisions to emerge naturally. Inner peace is not something you chase. It is something that grows when you stop feeding chaos. When you stop reacting, you reclaim your power. You respond only when necessary, and even then, with intention rather than impulse. Buddhism teaches that true strength is gentle, steady, and silent. In that steadiness, you discover a deep peace that remains untouched, no matter what happens around you. 7. Letting go is an act of compassion toward yourself. Buddhism teaches that compassion is not only something you offer to others. True compassion begins within. Many people believe they are being kind, loyal, or loving when they hold on to people and situations that hurt them, but in reality, they are abandoning themselves. They tolerate emotional pain, disrespect, confusion, and exhaustion because they fear being seen as selfish or ungrateful. Buddhism gently challenges this belief. It teaches that continuing to suffer unnecessarily is not virtue. It is ignorance of your own worth. When you hold on to what steals your happiness, you slowly teach your mind that your pain is acceptable. You normalize discomfort. You silence your intuition. You convince yourself that this is just how life is meant to feel. Over time, this creates deep inner wounds. You may appear strong on the outside, but inside you feel heavy, tired, and disconnected from yourself. Letting go, in this sense, is not rejection of others. It is an embrace of yourself. Compassion toward yourself means recognizing when something is harming your inner peace and choosing to step away, even if it feels difficult. Buddhism teaches that wisdom and compassion walk together. Wisdom sees clearly that holding on is causing suffering. Compassion responds by releasing what hurts without hatred, resentment, or blame. You do not need anger to let go. You need honesty. Honest acknowledgement that you deserve peace. Many people confuse self-compassion with weakness. They believe that being kind to themselves means avoiding responsibility or giving up too easily. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Self-compassion requires courage. It takes strength to admit that something you hoped for is no longer healthy for you. It takes awareness to see that love should not require self-destruction. Letting go is a brave act because it often means walking into uncertainty instead of staying in familiar pain. When you practice self-compassion, you stop asking, "How can I endure this?" and begin asking, "How can I care for myself?" This shift changes everything. You no longer measure your worth by how much you can tolerate. You measure it by how gently you treat your own heart. Buddhism teaches that a peaceful mind arises when self-violence ends, and holding on to suffering is a subtle form of self-violence. Letting go does not mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop caring at the expense of yourself. You can wish people well and still choose distance. You can forgive and still walk away. Buddhism does not ask you to remain in situations that destroy your inner balance. It asks you to act with wisdom, kindness, and non-attachment. Non-attachment does not mean indifference. It means loving without clinging and caring without losing yourself. As you let go, guilt often arises. You may feel selfish for choosing peace. You may worry that you are abandoning others. Buddhism teaches that guilt is often the voice of old conditioning, not truth. You were taught to prioritize others, even when it hurt you. Letting go challenges this conditioning. Compassion toward yourself means allowing guilt to arise without obeying it. You acknowledge the feeling, but you do not let it decide your future. Over time, self-compassion begins to heal wounds you did not even realize you were carrying. You stop criticizing yourself for past choices. You understand that you did the best you could with the awareness you had at the time. Buddhism teaches that judging your past self is another form of suffering. Compassion allows you to see your journey with kindness rather than regret. As you release what no longer serves you, you begin to feel lighter. Your body relaxes, your mind becomes quieter. You are no longer constantly bracing yourself for emotional impact. This is the natural result of self-compassion. Peace is not something you force. It arises when the conditions for suffering are removed. Letting go removes those conditions. Eventually, you realize that compassion toward yourself also improves how you relate to others. When you are no longer drained, resentful, or emotionally depleted, you become more present and genuine. You no longer give from emptiness, you give from fullness. Buddhism teaches that true compassion flows naturally from a peaceful mind. When you stop hurting yourself by holding on, kindness becomes effortless. Letting go is not an ending. It is a return to your natural state of balance and clarity. When you release people and situations that steal your happiness, you are not becoming cold or distant. You are becoming whole. You are choosing to live without constant emotional strain. This choice does not make you less loving. It makes your love healthier and more sincere. In Buddhism, compassion is inseparable from wisdom. Wisdom sees that suffering is unnecessary. Compassion chooses to end it. When you let go, you are practicing both. You are honoring your humanity. You are allowing yourself to rest, heal, and grow. And in that gentle release, you discover a quiet truth. Peace was never something you had to earn. It was always available the moment you chose to stop hurting yourself. 8. When you let go quietly, life begins to realign itself. Buddhism teaches that life is not chaotic by nature. What feels like chaos is often resistance. When you cling to what is no longer meant for you, life feels heavy, confusing, and stuck. You feel as though nothing is moving forward, even though you are constantly exhausted from trying. Letting go in silence changes this completely. Not because you force life to improve, but because you stop blocking its natural flow. Many people believe that letting go will leave them empty, lost, or disconnected. In reality, what leaves is not meaning, but resistance. What disappears is not purpose, but unnecessary struggle. Buddhism explains that suffering arises when we fight reality instead of understanding it. When you release people, roles, or situations that no longer align with your inner truth, life does not punish you. It reorganizes itself around your clarity. At first, this realignment is subtle. Nothing dramatic happens overnight, but something shifts internally. Your mind becomes quieter. You stop waking up with emotional weight already on your chest. You stop feeling the constant need to check, chase, explain, or fix. This inner stillness sends a powerful signal to life. It tells the world that you are no longer operating from fear, desperation, or attachment. Buddhism teaches that when attachment loosens, awareness expands. You begin to notice things you were too distracted to see before. Opportunities that once felt invisible slowly come into view. Conversations change. Your energy feels different. People who thrived on your emotional availability may drift away, while others who resonate with your peace naturally appear. This is not coincidence. It is alignment. When you let go quietly, you stop interfering with the natural intelligence of life. You stop forcing outcomes, relationships, and timelines. Instead, you allow life to unfold. Buddhism reminds us that growth does not need constant effort. A tree does not strain to grow. It grows because the conditions are right. Letting go removes the conditions that suffocate growth. Many people sabotage their own happiness by trying to control everything. They want certainty, reassurance, and guarantees. Buddhism teaches that control is an illusion. The more you seek it, the more anxious you become. Letting go is the moment you accept uncertainty without panic. You may not know what comes next, but you trust that clarity will emerge when the time is right. This trust allows life to move again. As life realigns, you may experience moments of solitude. Buddhism teaches that solitude is not punishment, it is refinement. Silence clears space for wisdom to arise. When distractions fall away, you begin to hear your own inner voice again. You reconnect with what truly matters to you, not what others expect, demand, or project onto you. This reconnection is essential for a meaningful life. Letting go also changes how you experience time. When you are attached, you are either trapped in the past or anxious about the future. When you release, you return to the present moment. Buddhism teaches that the present is the only place where peace exists. In the present, you are not waiting for someone to change. You are not replaying old wounds. You are simply here, breathing, aware, and alive. As alignment deepens, your decisions become clearer. You no longer overthink every choice. You feel guided rather than confused. This does not mean life becomes perfect. Challenges still arise. But you face them with steadiness instead of panic. You trust yourself more because you are no longer abandoning yourself for the sake of attachment. Buddhism teaches that right path emerges naturally when wrong attachments are released. You do not need to chase purpose. Purpose finds you when you are no longer distracted by what drains you. The energy you once wasted on emotional struggle becomes available for growth, creativity, and presence. You begin to live instead of endure. Letting go quietly also changes your relationship with effort. You stop forcing happiness. You stop measuring progress through struggle. Life feels lighter because you are no longer carrying unnecessary emotional baggage. This lightness is not superficial joy. It is deep ease, a sense that you are finally moving with life instead of against it. Over time, you may look back and realize that what you feared losing was never truly supporting you. What felt like abandonment was actually protection. Buddhism teaches that when something falls away, it creates space for something more aligned to enter. But this can only happen when you do not rush to fill the space with old patterns. Realignment is not loud. It does not announce itself with instant rewards. It reveals itself through peace, through better sleep, through fewer emotional storms, through the quiet confidence that you no longer need to cling to feel whole. This is how life confirms that you made the right choice. Letting go quietly is not about escaping responsibility. It is about taking responsibility for your inner state. It is choosing harmony over habit, awareness over attachment, truth over fear. When you release what no longer belongs to your path, life gently rearranges itself around your clarity. In Buddhism, this is not seen as luck or fate. It is cause and effect. When suffering is removed at the root, peace naturally follows. When attachment dissolves, alignment begins. And when you stop holding on, life finally has the space to move you forward in ways you could never force on your own. 9. True freedom begins when you no longer need to be understood. Buddhism teaches a truth that is difficult for the human ego to accept. The need to be understood by others is a subtle form of attachment, and attachment always leads to suffering. Many people do not realize how much of their emotional pain comes from wanting recognition, validation, or agreement. You want others to see your intentions, understand your pain, acknowledge your effort, or confirm that you were right. When this understanding does not come, frustration grows, resentment builds, and peace disappears. From a Buddhist perspective, the desire to be understood keeps you psychologically bound to other people's perceptions. You begin to measure your worth through their reactions. If they approve, you feel calm. If they misunderstand you, you feel disturbed. This creates a fragile inner state that rises and falls based on factors you cannot control. True freedom cannot exist in such conditions. Many people remain trapped in painful situations because they are still trying to explain themselves. They keep talking, clarifying, defending, and justifying, hoping that one day the other person will finally say, "Now I understand." Buddhism teaches that this moment may never come, not because your truth is invalid, but because understanding requires willingness. You cannot force awareness into someone who is not ready to receive it. When you let go of the need to be understood, something powerful happens inside you. You stop rehearsing explanations in your mind. You stop replaying conversations that never reached the outcome you wanted. You stop carrying the emotional burden of other people's limited perspectives. This release does not mean your experience was unimportant. It means you no longer require external confirmation to honor it. Buddhism teaches that peace arises from inner alignment, not external agreement. When you know your truth clearly, you do not need others to echo it back to you. You no longer feel compelled to convince, correct, or persuade. Silence becomes enough. Your actions reflect your understanding without words. This is a higher level of maturity where self-trust replaces the hunger for validation. The need to be understood often comes from fear of being misjudged. You worry that others will see you incorrectly, blame you unfairly, or misunderstand your intentions. Buddhism teaches that clinging to reputation is another form of suffering. People will see you through their own filters, shaped by their experiences, wounds, and beliefs. Trying to control these perceptions is exhausting and ultimately impossible. Letting go of this need does not make you indifferent. It makes you free. You still communicate when necessary, but you no longer chase comprehension. You speak your truth once, clearly and calmly, and then you release the outcome. You allow others to think what they think without internalizing it. This is not emotional withdrawal. It is emotional sovereignty. When you no longer need to be understood, you stop taking things personally. Criticism loses its sting. Silence from others no longer feels like rejection. Misinterpretations no longer shake your sense of self. Buddhism teaches that suffering decreases when the self becomes less rigid. When your identity is no longer tied to others' opinions, it becomes lighter and more flexible. This freedom also changes how you let go. You no longer feel the need to announce your departure, explain your reasons repeatedly, or justify your boundaries. You simply move on, quietly, respectfully. With clarity, letting go becomes clean instead of messy. There is less emotional residue, less unfinished business lingering in your mind. At first, this level of detachment feels uncomfortable. The ego protests. It wants recognition, it wants fairness, it wants to be seen as good, right, or justified. Buddhism teaches that this discomfort is a sign of growth. When the ego loosens its grip, awareness expands. You begin to experience a deeper peace that does not depend on being validated. Over time, you realize something profound. The people who truly matter do not require constant explanations. They feel your sincerity through your presence, not your arguments. And those who misunderstand you were never the gatekeepers of your peace to begin with. This realization removes a heavy burden from your heart. True freedom is not loud. It does not argue. It does not beg for understanding. It rests in quiet confidence. Buddhism teaches that when you stop needing others to see you clearly, you finally see yourself clearly. And in that clarity, suffering loses its grip. Letting go of the need to be understood is one of the final steps toward inner liberation. It marks the moment when your happiness is no longer negotiable, no longer dependent, and no longer delayed by external approval. You become whole within yourself. And when that happens, letting go in silence no longer feels like loss. It feels like relief. 10. When you finally let go, you return to who you were before the pain. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not destroy you, but prolonged attachment to suffering slowly covers who you truly are. Before disappointment, before betrayal, before emotional exhaustion, there was a version of you that felt lighter, more present, and more connected to life. Over time, holding on to what hurts places layers over that natural state. You become cautious, you become guarded, you begin to carry emotional weight that was never meant to stay with you. Letting go is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to who you were before pain taught you to tighten your grip. Many people believe that their personality has changed permanently because of what they have been through. Buddhism gently reminds us that this is not true. What has changed is not your nature, but your attachment. Pain conditioned you to stay alert, to overthink, to protect yourself by clinging to what felt familiar. These habits feel like part of you now, but they are not your true self. They are responses, not identity. Letting go slowly peels these layers away. When you hold on to past wounds, your mind stays anchored in survival mode. You anticipate disappointment. You expect loss. You read threat into neutral situations. Buddhism teaches that this constant vigilance is a form of suffering. The mind becomes tired from always preparing for harm. Letting go allows the nervous system to rest. It tells your body and mind that the danger has passed. This is when healing truly begins. Returning to yourself does not happen all at once. At first, you may feel unfamiliar with peace. Calm might feel strange. Silence may feel empty. This is because your mind has been conditioned to noise and emotional intensity. Buddhism teaches patience here. You allow peace to feel unfamiliar without rejecting it. You let stillness settle gradually, like dust falling after a storm. As you let go, you begin to notice subtle changes. You laugh more easily. You feel present during simple moments. You stop rehearsing painful stories in your head. Your thoughts no longer revolve around what went wrong or who hurt you. This is not forgetting, it is integration. The experience becomes part of your story, not the center of it. Buddhism teaches that your original nature is not broken. It is only obscured. Just as clouds do not damage the sky, pain does not damage your essence. Letting go removes the clouds. The clarity that remains was always there. This is why peace feels like a return rather than an achievement. You recognize it. It feels familiar, like coming home. When you release attachment, you also release the identity that was built around suffering. You stop seeing yourself as the one who was wronged, abandoned, or misunderstood. These stories lose their grip. They no longer define you. Buddhism teaches that clinging to identity is another form of attachment. When identity loosens, freedom expands. Letting go also restores your ability to trust life again, not blindly but wisely. You no longer move from fear alone. You listen to your intuition without anxiety distorting it. You stop expecting life to repeat the same pain. This openness allows new experiences to enter without being filtered through old wounds. As you return to yourself, you also reclaim joy. Not dramatic excitement, but quiet joy. The kind that comes from being at ease, from not needing constant reassurance. From not feeling emotionally pulled in every direction, Buddhism teaches that joy arises naturally when suffering is no longer fed. It does not need to be chased. It appears when the mind is no longer burdened. This return also brings self-trust. You realize that you survived without holding on, that you are capable of standing on your own inner ground. This confidence is not arrogance. It is stability. You stop fearing endings because you know they do not erase you. You stop fearing beginnings because you trust yourself to meet them. Letting go does not mean life becomes perfect. Challenges still arise, loss still happens. But you meet these experiences with resilience rather than panic. Buddhism teaches that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. When you let go of attachment, pain passes through without becoming a permanent resident in your mind. Eventually, you understand something deeply liberating. You were never meant to carry everything. You were never meant to hold on to every person, every role, every chapter. Life moves in cycles. Letting go is part of its rhythm. When you resist this rhythm, you suffer. When you move with it, you find ease. Returning to yourself is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is waking up without heaviness. It is breathing without tension. It is living without constant emotional negotiation. This is what Buddhism points toward again and again. Freedom is not found in accumulation, but in release. When you finally let go, you do not disappear. You reappear, clearer, lighter, more whole. And in that return, you realize that nothing essential was ever lost. You were always there, waiting patiently beneath the weight of what you were holding. 11. Letting go in silence is how you step into your highest self. Buddhism teaches that the highest version of yourself is not created through force, struggle, or constant self-improvement. It emerges naturally when what is false, heavy, and misaligned is released. Many people think growth requires adding more discipline, more effort, more control. But Buddhism points in the opposite direction. True growth happens through subtraction. You become lighter, not by becoming more, but by holding less. When you let go in silence, you stop performing your life for others. You stop shaping yourself to fit expectations, roles, and emotional demands that were never aligned with your inner truth. Much of the pain people carry comes from living in a way that is not authentic to who they are becoming. They stay quiet when they should speak, or they speak when silence would protect them. They stay where they have outgrown the space. This creates inner fragmentation. Letting go in silence heals that fragmentation. Your highest self does not argue for validation. It does not chase recognition. It does not need to prove its worth through endurance or sacrifice. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is quiet. When you release attachments without announcement, you conserve energy. That energy returns to you as clarity, stability, and self-trust. You are no longer leaking yourself into explanations, emotional reactions, or unreciprocated effort. Silence is powerful because it is honest. It acknowledges reality without resistance. When you let go loudly, with anger or resentment, part of you is still attached. You still want to be seen, heard, or justified. But when you let go silently, you are no longer negotiating with the past. You are choosing the present. This is a sign of maturity and deep inner alignment. Buddhism teaches that the ego thrives on noise. It wants to tell its story. It wants acknowledgement. It wants to be right. Letting go in silence weakens the ego's grip. You no longer define yourself by what happened to you. You stop carrying identities shaped by pain. You stop saying, "This is who I am because of what they did." Instead, you return to who you are beneath the story. Stepping into your highest self means living from awareness rather than reaction. When you let go, you stop being pulled by old triggers. You stop repeating emotional patterns that no longer serve you. Buddhism teaches that awareness dissolves habit. When you see clearly, you no longer need to force change. Change happens naturally because the mind no longer clings. As you step into this state, your boundaries become quieter but stronger. You do not explain them repeatedly. You do not defend them aggressively. You simply live by them. People feel this shift. Some will respect it, others will fall away. Buddhism teaches that this is not loss. It is alignment. Your highest self cannot coexist with constant compromise of your inner peace. Letting go in silence also deepens your connection with the present moment. When you are no longer consumed by what was or what should have been, your attention returns to now. Buddhism teaches that presence is the doorway to freedom. In presence, you are not defined by memory or anticipation. You are simply aware. From this awareness, wise action arises effortlessly. Your highest self is not emotionally reactive. It does not rush to fix, chase, or prove. It observes first. It responds only when necessary. This calm presence is not passivity. It is strength without aggression. When you let go, you stop confusing intensity with meaning. You begin to value peace over drama, depth over noise. Over time, you notice that your life feels simpler, not easier in every moment, but clearer. Decisions become less complicated because you are no longer trying to satisfy conflicting attachments. You know what drains you. You know what nourishes you. Buddhism teaches that clarity is a natural result of non-attachment. Letting go in silence also transforms how you experience relationships. You stop seeking completion from others. You connect without clinging. You love without losing yourself. This is what Buddhism describes as love without attachment. It is stable, respectful, and free. Your highest self does not beg for connection. It attracts resonance through presence. As you step into this version of yourself, you may feel periods of solitude. Buddhism teaches that solitude is not absence, it is integration. In solitude, the mind recalibrates, the heart softens. Old identities dissolve. This is where your highest self stabilizes, not through isolation, but through inner coherence. Eventually, you realize that letting go was not about walking away from others. It was about walking toward yourself. Each silent release brought you closer to balance. Each boundary honored brought you closer to truth. Each attachment released brought you closer to peace. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not a distant goal. It is the absence of clinging. When you let go in silence, you are practicing this truth in daily life. You are no longer waiting for permission to be whole. You are no longer postponing peace. Your highest self is not dramatic. It is steady. It is present. It is free from unnecessary suffering. And it emerges not when you finally win, explain, or are understood, but when you quietly release what no longer belongs to who you are becoming. This is the final freedom Buddhism points toward. Not escape from life, but full participation without attachment. When you let go in silence, you do not disappear from the world. You finally arrive in it, grounded, awake, and at peace. 12. When you let go completely, peace becomes your natural state. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you create, chase, or earn. Peace is your natural state before the mind begins clinging, resisting, and attaching itself to things it cannot control. When you finally let go completely, you do not gain peace. You return to it. What disappears is not meaning, love, or purpose, but the mental noise that was covering your inner stillness. Most people believe that peace will arrive once life becomes stable, once relationships improve, once problems are solved, or once the future feels secure. Buddhism gently exposes this illusion. Life is always changing. Stability is temporary. Waiting for perfect conditions is another form of attachment. When you let go completely, you stop postponing peace. You stop telling yourself, "I will be calm when this changes." You become calm now, regardless of circumstances. Complete letting go does not happen through force. It happens through understanding. You see clearly how much suffering was created by holding on, replaying, expecting, and resisting. This clarity does not judge you. It softens you. You realize that you were never weak for holding on. You were human, but now awareness has grown, and with awareness comes release. When you let go completely, the mind stops negotiating with reality. It no longer asks, "Why did this happen?" or "How could they do this?" These questions fade because they no longer serve a purpose. Buddhism teaches that suffering continues as long as the mind argues with what already is. When the argument ends, suffering ends with it. This does not mean life becomes emotionless. Feelings still arise, sadness still appears, joy still visits. But these emotions pass through without leaving scars. They no longer define you. You feel without drowning. You experience without clinging. This is emotional freedom. The Buddha described this as being in the world, but not owned by it. As peace becomes your natural state, your relationship with life changes. You stop reacting impulsively. You stop taking things personally. You stop internalizing others' moods, actions, or limitations. This does not come from indifference, but from deep understanding. You see that everyone is acting from their own conditioning. Buddhism teaches that seeing clearly dissolves resentment. Letting go completely also changes how you experience effort. You no longer push yourself through life. You move with it. Action arises naturally instead of from anxiety or fear. You still work, still care, still engage, but without tension. Buddhism teaches that right action flows effortlessly from a peaceful mind. When peace becomes your foundation, everything you do feels more aligned. Your thoughts become quieter, not because you control them, but because there is less for them to cling to. The mind no longer circles the same stories. Old memories lose their emotional charge. The future no longer feels threatening. This quiet is not emptiness. It is clarity. In this clarity, intuition becomes stronger. You sense when to act and when to wait without overthinking. Complete letting go also dissolves the fear of loss. When you no longer cling, you are no longer afraid of endings. You understand that life moves in cycles. Relationships begin and end. Roles shift. Chapters close. Buddhism teaches that resisting this truth creates suffering, while accepting it brings peace. When you accept impermanence, you stop fearing it. Peace as a natural state also transforms how you love. You no longer love from need, fear, or dependency. You love from fullness. You allow others to be who they are without trying to control or change them. This love is lighter, healthier, and more sincere. Buddhism teaches that non-attachment is the purest form of love because it allows freedom on both sides. As peace stabilizes, you become less concerned with outcomes. You do your part, but you release the results. This removes a tremendous burden from the heart. You stop measuring your worth by success or failure. You understand that effort is yours, outcomes are not. This understanding brings deep relief. Complete letting go also heals the body. Chronic tension fades, breathing deepens, sleep improves, the nervous system relaxes. Buddhism recognizes the intimate connection between the mind and the body. When mental clinging dissolves, the body responds with ease. Peace is not only felt mentally, but physically. At this stage, silence feels comfortable rather than lonely. Solitude feels nourishing rather than empty. You enjoy your own presence. You no longer need constant stimulation or reassurance. Buddhism teaches that contentment arises naturally when desire quiets. You experience enoughness, not because life is perfect, but because you are no longer chasing completeness outside yourself. Letting go completely does not make you passive. It makes you precise. You choose carefully where to invest your energy. You stop engaging in emotional battles that do not matter. You stop explaining yourself to people who are not listening. You stop proving your worth. Peace becomes your filter. Eventually, you realize something profound. You were never meant to carry everything. You were never meant to hold on to every emotion, memory, or person. Life flows when you do. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not an extraordinary state. It is simply the absence of unnecessary suffering. When you let go completely, peace stops being a goal and becomes your ground. You live from it. You respond from it. You return to it again and again. No matter what arises, peace remains available because it no longer depends on conditions. This is the quiet freedom Buddhism points toward. Not escape from life, but deep harmony with it. When you stop clinging, stop resisting, and stop needing life to be different, peace reveals itself as what was always there beneath the noise. And in that realization, you understand the final truth. Letting go was never about losing anything important. It was about remembering who you are when nothing is being held too tightly. Letting go in silence is not a single decision. It is a gradual return to yourself. It is the quiet understanding that peace was never missing from your life, only buried beneath attachment, resistance, and emotional weight you were never meant to carry. Buddhism teaches that suffering continues not because life is cruel, but because the mind clings to what has already shown it cannot bring lasting happiness. When you stop holding on, you stop fighting reality. You stop demanding that people change, that the past make sense, or that life follow a specific script. In this surrender, something gentle and powerful takes place. The mind softens, the heart opens. You begin to live without constant emotional negotiation. Silence becomes comforting. Stillness becomes safe. Letting go does not mean forgetting, denying, or becoming cold. It means accepting what is, honoring what was, and choosing not to suffer any longer. You learn to walk away without anger, to release without resentment, and to move forward without announcing it to the world. This quiet strength is the essence of Buddhist wisdom. As you let go, life does not shrink, it expands. You make space for clarity, balance, and presence. You begin to respond instead of react. You trust instead of control. You live instead of endure. Peace stops being something you chase and becomes the ground you stand on. In the end, letting go in silence is not about losing people, situations, or chapters. It is about gaining yourself back. It is about returning to the calm awareness that was always within you, waiting patiently beneath the noise. And when you finally rest there, you realize the deepest truth of all. Nothing you released was ever meant to define you, but everything you let go of led you back home.